Hi, thanks for having me. The purpose of this panel is to give you sort of the perspective of real companies and real developers using GWT, all the good things and all the bad things, and show you some real applications and go sort of a deep dive into what made them, what using GWT to create them was like. As he mentioned, I worked at Google for about 4.5 years. I worked on a number of products there, including our core search product, Google Local, Google Maps, and then at the end I managed our developer products. And I recently left to start my own company. The two GWT users we have here are Alex Moffett from Lombardi Software and Christopher Klunt from the Class Connection. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and as a part of their introduction, they're going to demonstrate the GWT apps that their companies have created, just to give you something concrete to visualize as we talk about sort of the details of what it was like using GWT for those apps. I want to start off with Alex from Lombardi Software.
Right, so stage one. So can we switch over to the laptop, please? Thanks. So I'm the engineering manager for our Blueprint product, which is a process documentation and process discovery tool. We've got about 2,000 customers in around 48 countries. At least when people register, they claim which country they want to be from, and 48 different countries. Sorry. 48. Better? Like this? Okay. I can't see my screen. Ah, move the mic. Okay. Why didn't I think of that? So, leaning over like this, what you're looking at here is sort of the main part of the Blueprint app, which is where you go ahead and you document your process. So you've got an outline on the left-hand side. This is an example onboarding process. And on the right-hand side, you have what we call a process map, which shows you a high-level view of the process, so the top-level stuff. So we say, okay, we've got a thing called background check. This is a milestone. The process is broken down into several different milestones. Maybe this is a way that you want to monitor it or check its progress. Background check is one of those milestones. It's made up of two things. We do a criminal record check and a drug screen. And those things are actually sub-processes because they've got little bits of stuff inside. We have at this top level here, on the right in the map, we only show the top two levels. Now, we've got some drill down capability, so I should be able to click on this thing here, and then we drill down and see in more detail what's actually in the background check. And then we now go to what is the most complicated bit of stuff we've done, and also the slowest bit of stuff we've done, which is this process diagram thing. As you might imagine, this diagram is actually specially, because this is a demo one, specially created to look good in the diagram, because actually doing this layout and routing problem is not easy, and doing it in JavaScript on IE6 is especially difficult to get it to run at a reasonable speed. We've got stuff like you can zoom in and out, which is reasonably good. You can add new things onto the diagram. We've got inline editing. We should have inline editing. We're actually seeing the latest version, unreleased version here. So we got inline editing. And of course, because it's all MVC, etc., that's visible back here. Let's go back to our onboarding. And there should be some new activity, hello, here in this section. We started work on this thing January 2006 with the initial prototype, which was done using Flash and HTML. We abandoned Flash because we had some real problems with the interaction between Flash and HTML in Firefox, and moved to a pure JavaScript solution using the Dojo Toolkit, which got us to the stage where we decided we couldn't go any further with that, and we had to find something else, at which point one of the guys at work came across GWT, and we rewrote the whole thing in GWT to come out with a beta September of last year, and the actual GA release June of this year.
Thank you. And I'm just going to move straight on to the other demonstration, and then we'll go into questions for both of you. Sitting next to me is Christopher Clunt with a very different application called the class connection. He's going to demonstrate on the same computer.
Hey everyone. Yeah, like you said, we're a little different app. Basically, we put together an application for students, university, and at the high school level. Recent graduate of the University of Wisconsin, myself, and a couple other guys got together and said, wouldn't it be great if we could make a study site, a study tool for students to encompass their academic life as opposed to their social life, something like Facebook would do. So we put together something called the Class Connection, way for students to organize all their classes, their calendar events for their classes, keep their files online, make flashcards, form study groups, become a tutor, message each other, that kind of stuff. This is our first go at a web application, and frankly, I hadn't written 10 lines of JavaScript before we started, so that should be a good testament to the powers of Google Web Toolkit and Java. But basically here you're in the login page is our demo user, which is Ferris Bueller, and he's got some classmates. And if I click on classes, here we do everything. We kind of copied the sync model that you notice on the GWT sync, because that seems to be a real good way for user interface. So we have most of our organization on the left with tabs on the top. You can switch between his different classes. He's in Italian 100, art history, psychology, and the like. And each class, you know, we've got a little bit of integration with Scriptaculous, for example, that you can see the class list and do things like that. Calendars and was one of our more difficult applications to try to work with and get a calendar and dealing with dates and stuff. But here you can see the month view, and you can view what's going on by the week and view his classes that are going on. We really like to use the pop-up panel. That's one of our favorite widgets that GWT has, and we did a little change to make it draggable so you can move it into view and put it where you want. Stuff like that. You can do dynamic, you know, we love click listeners and stuff like that, where you can get rid of events or add events, view them or not, right on the fly. One of our other favorite things is flashcards. Was one of our cool apps that take a look at here. Ferris made an art history deck for Italian 100. Did a little incorporation with Lightbox. But you can run these cards and put some pictures in it, and when you hover over, get the answer. Got that right? No, I don't know who that is, and so on. So, just some of our features. So
that's great. So you both alluded to it, but obviously the most obvious question to those in the audience considering using GWT who haven't started is, why did you choose GWT, and what is the thing you are most happy about after choosing it, and what are you, the thing that you are least happy about having chosen it for your project? Why don't we just start off? Yeah, that's true. Alex, do you want to start off? Since you obviously went through a few frameworks before you settled on GWT.
Indeed. We chose like we said, we chose GWT because developing in JavaScript just wasn't working for us. I mean, we don't, obviously no one does, but we don't think we're stupid developers. So when we were unable to get, I mean, we were able to get the Dojo-based solution to work, but it was nigh on impossible to maintain. You just couldn't refactor anything. You couldn't work out what was being called where. You couldn't do any optimization. It was very hard for new people coming onto the team who didn't have a bunch of not just JavaScript experience, but experience working with Dojo and working with the application to work out what the heck was going on.
How many developers do you have on your team?
Right now, there's me, Damon, who's actually in the audience. Wave your hand, Damon. We have another guy who's was working as an intern with us and is joining full-time in February. And occasionally we have one other person to do this or that sort of a task. Okay.
Go on. Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's fine. So another guy at work came across GWT and recommended that we did it. We did a quick sort of prototype to see what the benefits were, and then we just rewrote the whole damn thing. There's still some bits of the original JavaScript code in there that deal with the client-side data model, and we call into those using JSNI. We're trying to gradually get rid of them, mostly because it's really frustrating when you're going through debugging in hosted mode and you get to a bit where it calls into JavaScript, and then you're like, I can't actually step through that anymore. So we're trying to get rid of as much of that stuff as we can.
And what's been the hardest thing in terms of using GWT relative to your previous frameworks?
I know it sounds silly, but I don't really think there is anything that I would point to that's worse in GWT than the way we were doing it before. I mean, it really is just positive all the way across. I mean, I have some gripes about GWT, about stuff that I wish it would do, but certainly compared to the original, it's impossible to say that there's anything that's worse.
Okay. So, Christopher, you mentioned that you chose GWT largely because you didn't know JavaScript. Was there anything else that factored into your decision? I mean, have you tried any other frameworks since you started using GWT?
We really haven't. We started with GWT from the get-go. Boss said, this is Java, you know Java, try this, and that's pretty much why we did it. But no, it's certainly, I think it's one of the, I mean, it's simple, like Joel has alluded to and everybody that's talked to before. It's Java. It's simple. It's supported. There's a large community. There's a lot of support and a lot of libraries and a lot of things you can do. Debugging in Eclipse, strongly typed language. The list goes on, and it just made a lot of sense to me. I wanted to write in Eclipse. I wanted to debug and have the powers of that as well, and do those things, and let Google do the tricky work of compressing it down and obfuscating it and converting it to JavaScript and handling cross-browser support. I just wanted to write code, and that was the easiest way to do it. So.
Okay, so just to sort of switch gears, if you had to pick sort of your favorite one or two GWT features, what would they be, and where do you use them in your application? Do you want to take this, Alex?
We don't actually use it in the application, but I mean, my favorite thing has got to be hosted mode. And the fact that hosted mode actually works, that when you think about it, how the heck are you going to get something like that to actually work? It's still amazing to me. I mean, you can go into IntelliJ and you can step through your code and the browser does what you expect it to do. Amazing. Apart from that, I mean, all the other...
Sorry for interrupting, but do you generally, when you're developing, do you run completely in hosted mode? Like, how often do you compile in your sort of write, debug, run cycle?
Probably maybe every 5 or so goes through changing the code.
Okay.
Because I need to make sure that I don't manage to break it in IE.
Okay, so it's still a fairly integral, a fairly integral part of your development process. Yeah. You still compile and run it in the browser. What about you, Christopher? What's your favorite GWT feature?
Well, I second his sympathy about programming to IE6. I still haven't upgraded to IE7 because I have to run hosted mode in IE6 for everybody else in the world who hasn't upgraded yet. But my favorite parts are compressing it down. I mean, we've got 40,000 lines of code. That's 4 megabytes of Java code. For our app, and that thing's compressed down to 900 KB, and when we gzip that and send it over the wire, it's 300. That's amazing in my eyes. I mean, how else do you do that? And hosted mode, yeah, certainly hosted mode, being able to, in real time, make updates to your Java code, see that reflected in hosted mode, take a look at how that's affecting things. And I'd also argue manpower. I don't know how if you were programming all your JavaScript in something like Emacs or doing something like that, how many people you'd have to have just, keeping track of where the code is and who's working on what and who's touched what. And, we've got it in Eclipse, we've got it under an SVN repository, and a team of 3, I think, can do the amount of work that maybe a team of 8 JavaScript programmers would do.
So he mentioned code size, which is a really serious issue for AJAX applications.
Yeah.
Can you, actually, do you guys give us a sense of how big each of the components of your application are and how much data is transferred over the wire?
Well, size-wise, we've got about 29,000 lines, excluding comments and white space, of Java on the server, and about 34,000 that gets compiled with GWT. So there are 4 main pages in the application, and it's a total, when you just add up the JavaScript for one particular browser, of 1.3 meg of OBF-style JavaScript for all 4 pages, and the largest page is 500K. I don't actually know how much data we transfer over the wire. We do that trick that was alluded to in one of the presentations where the first load of the actual HTML page has embedded in it all the data that's going to be displayed on the page as a block of JavaScript, and we read that in, so we don't load the page and then make an RPC call. It's already in the page in the first time, and then what we do from then on is just get incremental updates. So if someone makes an editing change on the screen, we send it across to the server, and then the model is updated when we get the response back from the server. And this also allows us to have multiple people viewing the same model and actually keep them in sync. So that if Damon was looking at something on a browser and I was looking at the same thing and he made a change, it would also be reflected in the view that I have.
Well, that's impressive. And what do you use for that? That would obviously require pushing things from the server that weren't initiated by a user. I mean, what do you use for that?
So sort of what we use as a servlet container is Jetty, and the reason we chose that was because they have a continuations feature that lets you effectively suspend a request to the server without consuming a thread. So our original thought was, well, what we'll do is every so often, we'll make a request to the server, and then if a change is detected on the server, it can just use that request to send the change back to the client, and won't this be smart, and we won't have to do a whole bunch of polling very frequently. The problem was we ran straight into the 2 limits, the 2 connections to the same host problem, which was particularly severe in Dojo, so that what would happen would be the RPC call, or the call to the server, would then block the loading of images, or the loading of images would block the RPC call, so we had to back off to that, and currently, unfortunately, we're actually using a polling strategy, and we just poll the back end every so often and see if there are any new changes. We really need to change that and go back to trying to get the continuation solution to work, that commit-style approach.
So it sounds like you're not extremely happy with what you're doing currently,
No.
and there's still some work to be done.
I mean, it works.
Yeah.
So from the point of view of we have an app and it's in production, and by that measure it's successful, but that's a bit that we're not proud of.
Have either of you done any elaborate timing metrics on how fast your application loads, and how that maybe has that changed over the course of GWT versions of all? Have either of you done any elaborate testing along those lines?
Well, we had, I know that when we went from 1.3 to 1.4, that shrunk our code substantially, probably by the larger numbers, like 40, 50%, and doing so sped up the download time, obviously, being smaller code, and execution was a little bit faster as well. And I think different browsers have different, different quirks. Moving to Safari 3 runs our application pretty quick, but I mean that's the big thing, right? Is if you code in PHP and your server does all the work and it sends the HTML over the wire, and your client is always changing and always grabbing those pages, it's not going to cache anything, which means that the download time for each visit is not going to change. So people come to our website and they might wait a couple seconds more up front the first time they visit it, but as long as we don't change the app, they cache that JavaScript, and then the next time they come there, it's instant and it's blazing fast because all they're getting is their specific client information, but they've already got the framework to build the whole website, which was in the JavaScript file. So,
yeah, I mean, we did some poking around with Charles and some poking around with Ethereal to look at what was actually going on, particularly because we've got an offshore test site in Kiev in the Ukraine, and they were seeing absolutely appalling performance for sort of the QA version of the app, which is hosted at the same site as the production app on equivalent VMs. So they should be seeing fairly reasonable performance, and we were very worried that we'd actually managed to get something wrong in the coding. It turns out it's just appalling performance that they were having over the network. In addition to that, of course, we did manage to discover a bunch of things with not getting HTTP 1.1 recognized correctly by various browsers. So you can see that, oh, why is IE6 actually going ahead and making a whole bunch of different connections? Why isn't Keep Alive actually working? Why aren't we getting gzip like we wanted to? All those sorts of things, just by having someone really watch what Charles shows you about what the order of requests are, what the actual headers you're getting back are. I mean, our production system runs with an Apache front end, which uses mod rewrite to send the request to the app back through to the Jetty servers. We try and serve all the static stuff off the Apache servers.
Another sort of change of pace, but what do you think is, what would you most like to see in GWT that's currently missing? Like what would help either your productivity or just features in general?
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't want to knock GWT here because they've made our life easy, but...
No, this isn't knocking. These are feature requests. Yeah.
Okay. One thing which will be, the response is probably, why don't I submit this? In GWT unit test requires that you use the embedded server. So when we run hosted mode, we don't use the embedded server. We actually talk to an instance of Jetty that we have running. So when you start up to do some hosted mode testing, you run Jetty and you run against an expanded WAR file system, so that as you make changes to the Java code, they're actually served, and it all works fine. The problem is when you use GWT unit test, it wants to serve the unit test code from its embedded server, and there's no minus no server flag that you can pass to that thing, which means you can't actually do any testing that requires that you communicate to your own server. So what we had to do was directly override the servlet inside whichever of the jar files it is, so that instead of talking to the GWT unit test, it talks to one of ours, which sort of proxies all the requests that it knows are not for test files through to the real server, and serves all the test files from the embedded server. And that actually works, because GWT unit test, I mean, JUnit testing of effectively your JavaScript application is fantastic. I mean, it's fantastic. So we have a continuous integration system set up using Bamboo, so that when the code gets checked in, of course, it all gets built and all the unit tests get run. And it's excellent to be able to actually exercise. You can't check the visuals, but you can certainly check that all the commands do the right things, that the model is actually in the correct state after the command is executed. Excellent.
And what about you, Christopher?
Yeah, JUnit really, I think, can save your butt, and that's something we're trying to work at implementing, but I second that. The ability to incorporate JUnit is great. Some of ours are mostly in the testing mode. When you run in hosted mode, if you run on a Windows platform, it takes your OS's default browser and picks that for your hosted mode. So if you're in IE7, you get that. If you're in IE6, you get that. So you can't test hosted mode in Firefox on Windows currently. It sure would be great if you could flop between different browsers in hosted mode instead of having to compile and put to production and then test or something like that.
Actually, that brings up an interesting question. A lot of the GWT sort of promotes that, write once and have it work in all browsers. How much have you had to tweak your application for each browser that you are deploying to? How much of your time is spent testing on the various browsers? You both mentioned hosted mode and compiling to test on various browsers. How much of an issue is that for you? You can just maybe start, Christopher, since you're talking about it.
Less than everybody I've talked to who has developed JavaScript or HTML without this that's all they do is complain about browser incompatibility, and I don't understand what the big deal is. I mean, to me, it's a foreign entity because GWT makes it so easy to do cross-browser support.
Is it mainly CSS issues that you're dealing with, or is it actually, are they DOM issues? I mean, what are the primary issues you encounter that don't sort of just automatically work across.
Sure. I mean, maybe our CSS, our design guy, you know, he sometimes has some difficulties having to throw in a exclamation point here and there to force IE6 to do something. But, you know, for the most part, it's that we haven't had to make a lot of changes, and it does work, and it works across everything. I mean, both sides, we haven't really had to do, I don't know, I haven't spent 10 hours on cross-browser support. So.
Alex, has your experience been as rosy as
not quite. I mean, we got the same problem. So I think there's two classes of, or I would divide it into two sorts of things. There's just the stuff that you do because they're different browsers, which is the CSS type of stuff, or the bits where it doesn't quite work in IE, but it works in Firefox, and it's not GWT's fault that it doesn't work correctly. And then the other sorts of things, which have mostly been removed in 1.4, was that in 1.3 there were some issues where we had to do overrides to the DOM classes provided by GWT to get some specific stuff to work properly. And there was also a memory leak in the RPC code, I believe, that we had to patch. That's all gone away now in 1.4, and we have, I think, one remaining override for IE6 to do, I can't remember exactly what, but it's like a couple of lines of changes. I mean, oh, actually, on the griping, well, I can gripe in public now about this. I was also trying to override something else in, I think in the GWT unit test again, and all the methods are marked final. And that makes it really difficult for me to override the run method because it's final. So I had to actually go ahead and this was to fix the problem that Apple managed to break GWT hosted mode when they released Leopard. And that's recently been fixed with a special patched version, but it's still, the patch didn't actually fix the GWT unit test stuff.
Leopard still doesn't have 1.6. So
yes,
that's,
but we should complain to
Apple for that.
About that.
So I think that I wanted to leave a lot of time for questions. So I think this is probably as good a time as any to open it up to the floor for questions, since you all may have some, I think these two up here probably have as much practical experience using GWT as any developers, and a great forum to answer your questions if you have any.
I wanted to find out how you involve the graphic designers. Like, you know, I mean, the way GWT seems to me is that programmers basically take over the design, and I'm just trying to see how you involve the HTML designers or graphic designers.
Right, so we have usability, user experience expert guy in the product management group, and he does the initial wireframing, and this is what it's meant to look like, plus all of the graphic elements work for us. But it is down to the programmers to get the final, at least the way we do it at Lombardi, to get the final look and feel the way that it's been specified. I mean, that even involves the, you know, responding to complaints about, hey, that thing is 2 pixels off where I said it ought to be, which of course, people who mostly do the server side of stuff, it's like, I don't care about that 2 pixels. Why is it 2 pixels off? Why is that so important? But I mean, if that's the way that it should look, that's the way we have to make it look, and that all of that sort of stuff comes down to the programs. I mean, I think it's the division between the UI and the pictures side of stuff and the programming side of stuff. GWT doesn't really do much, at least as I see it, to help solve that problem. But it also exists even if you're doing JSPs and HTML.
When you want to set everything, set style name is probably, you know, that's key to everything. Don't set it interior like they were saying, set a style name. I've got a design guy, he's in the audience here, Eric, and he does, you know, we work together, and I set a style name and he's free to go at it with a CSS sheet, but I think you do have to be a little bit more intimately connected to the final look as a programmer with GWT, because you are laying out the panels. You know, you are laying out whether it's going to be a table or a flow panel or a resizable panel, and your CSS guy and your design guy doesn't have control over that, only you do. So you've got to know what he wants, or tell him to shut up, or one thing or the other. So.
So the question of using hosted mode and wedging in proxy servers came up a couple of times. This is something I've had on my stack of things that I wanted to do but not done yet. So I'm asking it to see if anybody here has done it, which is, has anybody here played with hosted mode and Selenium remote control acting as a reverse proxy stuck in the middle?
I've tried using Selenium remote control to do testing of our app. I gave up because though I can get Selenium to log on, and I can navigate to that process map page. What Selenium won't let me do is do things like press the down arrow. I mean, if I can't press the down arrow and I can't press tab, I can't really work out, I can't navigate in my app. So I had to sort of stop at that point. We're looking at, there's a thing called wattage that is IE only, that actually tries to control the IE browser using Java, and maybe that's going to be better for us. But, and we also tried whatever the product from Rational is called. And though that's, I mean, expensive and enormous and only supports IE6.
No. Evan, sorry.
I have one suggestion, since we're all friends here and this is open source stuff. When you ask your question, if you'd like to introduce yourself and say a little bit about what you do, that would be useful background.
Looks like good.
My name is Chris Jones. I'm from ESML. I'm an engineer there. Real quick, Selenium RC, it does allow you, the API does allow you to fire arbitrary events, like key events and stuff like that we use.
Yeah, I can't get the browser to pick it up is the problem. I mean, I know I can see that I can send like some key event, and I know what the ASCII, the code is for the down arrow.
Right.
No effect.
Huh. We use Selenium pretty extensively to test our app. We don't go through hosted mode or anything like that, but it works pretty well for us.
Nice.
Anyway, so my question's pretty simple with a possible follow-up. How many modules do you guys have in your apps?
What sort of definition do you want to make?
GWT modules.
That we created?
Oh, okay.
The ones that you compile to produce your end product.
Right. We have 4 of them.
2.
One of those is actually also used, the code in it is also used on the server side. So we've got a special module that does the layout, and that stuff is compiled as to bytecode to run on the server, and also compiled through GWT to run on the client. So there's a client model, there's a layout, there's a model, and then there's the rest of the stuff, which is all the web side of stuff.
And so my follow-up question is, how many entry points do you have across those modules, and how do you collect those to share code across the modules, if you do?
We've got, I mean, we have 4 for the 4 pages that we have in the app. And we've got some for testing.
So each page is its own context. Okay.
Yeah.
We did it with one, like our registration page is separate. That's got 1 entry point. Like a password reset page is separate. That's 1 entry point. But the bulk of the app is all 1 page. Strictly, I mean, it's just one load, 1 page, one entry point.
Actually, one quick question. You've mentioned a lot of lines of code. What is your GWT compile time for your apps? How long are you sitting around waiting to see if IE6 still works?
If we build for all of the browsers, it's 3 minutes to compile the actual website of the stuff. That was 34,000.
2 gigs of RAM on Intel Core 2 Duo. 2 gigahertz is 6 minutes for all our pages, for everything. That puts it into a WAR file too. We're using an ANT build file.
My name is Bruce Johnson, the engineering manager of GWT. One of the things that this is not really a planted question, I swear. What we talk about all the time, you're probably sick of hearing, is that we really care about what end users say about apps built with GWT. So would you guys mind sharing stories that, or good or bad, really. Bad is sometimes actually more instructive for us so that we can see what we need to work on. But we would also be willing to hear some good stories from users. But so what are you hearing in general?
In general, the users, I mean, our users like the app. We have performance problems. We've rewritten the diagram because our original version of the diagram used a lot of, was built all by creating little divs and doing it that way and hooking in events at a very low level. Damon's just finished a rewrite that does it all with the inner HTML trick. We generate the HTML, stick it all in there, register event handler at the top level, and do it all using a flyweight pattern. So performance is a thing that they don't like, but I mean, that's really down to we need to get better at doing it. I don't think the users really care that it's GWT, unfortunately. I mean, it's a web app, it works really well, they like the experience, but yeah, I mean, it's not a selling point for us. We try and sell, but yeah, hey, this is going to help you document your processes. You know, obviously, if a recruiting tool, hey, this is a big GWT app, come work on our big GWT app. It's good for us as a you know, a software engineering department. It's nice, but for the users, the experience is really down to the usability. You know, the product managers pick the right set of features that address what the tasks the users actually want to do. The usability people work out how that should best be presented, and we implement it as well as we possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, we actually, funny story, we actually were worried about the load time of loading such a large JavaScript file, getting it executed, and having the users start using the application, so that we had a loading page that we sent them to right after they logged in that would just have a little spinny icon, and we put a bunch of text on that page to tell them, oh, we're using GWT and it's going to be really cool, it's going to be super fast, and all this stuff, and we ran a bunch of focus groups, and all the students were like, what the hell is that? We don't care. That was fast enough. I didn't even have time to read that. So we took all the text off and just left it to 3 lines. But yeah, I second that. They don't know, they don't care, and it works cool. So.
Question to the gentleman from Class Connections. Did you say you use Scriptaculous?
Yes.
And what for?
We use blind down and blind up effect. That's pretty much the only effect we use pretty consistently. It used to be part of the SourceForge widgets library, I think, and then I'm not sure who's responsible for that code, but I don't know if it got put in or if we took it from there. I can't remember, but we just use it to hide a lot of our content. We do a lot of accordion style effects on a lot of our pages, so we do use that to hide content and show it dynamically.
So what's your experience mixing it with GWT?
It's using that SourceForge code. Somebody wrote some code with a nice effect. They've got like you can pass in all the options and do all the effects, and I think that might have been Robert Hansen, I'm not sure, but it's super slick and super easy. So.
Hello, my name is Bret, and I work with Google and localization tools, and I was curious if either of you have done anything in regards to internationalization and localization of your products, and if so, what was your experience with that? Do you have any wishes for improvement of those things in Google Web Toolkit?
We've got to the state where you can enter text in any language and it will display correctly, which may not sound like a great achievement, but it did take a bit of fiddling around to get all the headers right. It's stored in a database, it comes out correctly, the PDFs we generate have got the right text in. What we haven't done is localized any of the UI. We don't even have all of the strings correctly out in resource bundles yet. I mean, there's still too much stuff where people, hey, we just developed this by embedding the string into the Java code. And it works, but it's going to bite us in the ass later.
Yeah, same thing. I mean, for like our flashcards application, kids can put in any language they want, and we store that in the database and feed it back correctly. But yeah, we've been so pressed with doing all these other things. To be honest, it's kind of one of our lower on our list. So we have more money and more people, I guess. But yeah. So.
Ethel, and I'm from Associated Software Consultants, Cleveland. I was wondering if you could share some, I know you said you use Jetty as your servlet container, but if
Yep.
you could share what your backend looks like and what you use for your server communication, like GWT or RPC or
Sure,
something.
sure. So, right, what we got? So we use Postgres as a database server. Our data model isn't actually, is basically, there are like 3 tables, because on top of the Postgres stuff, we have, in Java, our own sort of persistent store thing to give us versioning for every single data attribute. Because one of the things we like to be able to do is to show a complete version history and to be able to roll back. So we got Postgres as that thing. Jetty is a servlet container. We use Apache with mod rewrite, so Apache 2.2 with mod rewrite and the gzip stuff in there for the web server side. We host it all on a Rackspace, and then we support on the front IE6, IE7, and Firefox 2. We also support Safari, mostly because that's what the CTO uses. So it's a problem if it doesn't work in Safari.
We use MySQL, thinking of switching to Postgres, actually. We run that. We do GWT RPC, serve it up from Tomcat, and use Apache for web server. And I guess another beef for the GWT guys, I think the RPC works that you have a server-side interface and you have a client-side interface, which is the asynchronous interface. And I think the asynchronous interface could be created automatically from the server-side interface, and sometimes it's always confusing, you know, to keep both of those together. So
I'm sorry, I forgot to answer the question about we use JSON and RPC. The JSON stuff is really a holdover from our initial prototypes, and it's sort of the easiest format for the persistent store to produce, because it also handles just producing diffs between 2 versions. It comes back in a format that's easily converted to JSON. But all the recent stuff we've done with RPC.
Hi, my name is Salman Hamani. We work for, my colleague here is Jamie. We work for a projector development company, and this is a question not just for the panelists, but for the entire audience. We're wondering if anybody is actually using GWT on an embedded device, because we have 4 different projects, and we're using GWT for an embedded device. So if anyone's out there using GWT, that'll be, it'd be nice to kind of talk to them after. Anyone?
You're a pioneer.
Oh, a good place to be.
Did we have somebody back here? Oh, an embedded device or another question? Well, I'll give it to you anyway.
Hi, my name is Nehul. I'm from Service Source. Basically, we are doing software consulting. My question is, you guys have 4 different modules. Do you guys find any need to talk between those modules? Like, say, module number 1 is already loaded on website. Do you feel like, okay, I want to call method from that module, you know, from module 2? Do you find any need, or you decided like, oh, those are 4 different modules and they will run independently, you know?
Yes, I mean, the way that we structure the code and the way it gets compiled into modules is sort of, I mean, they're fairly independent in that, you know, we've got the 4 different entry points that correspond to the 4 different pages, and then we've got the software's divided up into 4 different modules for the point of view of developing it. But the actual, any bit of code could be used by any module. Of course, you've got to get all the pathing correct when you actually do the GWT compile and when you put it into that XML file so that you get all the right stuff referenced in the right places. And that's really the only bit where we come up against problems. You know, you end up with some widget in some class hierarchy and you need to refactor it to move it somewhere else because the 2 bits are not actually, communicating with each other when you're doing the compile. But that's not been a big issue. I mean, the source code organization's been pretty easy for us. We build with Maven and use Ant for the GWT portions of it.
Hi, I'm Ray Jantz. I'm with LSI Logic, and we don't actually have a GWT application. We have a Java application that we are considering rewriting using GWT, and by the way, that will be on an embedded platform. So from my perspective, as I guess mainly coming from the Java world, what I want to ask is, in building your applications, did you miss the Java thread abstraction? Because that seems like something I really don't want to give up very badly.
I'll go first. Yes, sometimes you miss it because you think, wouldn't it be nice to spin something off into a separate thread? But then on the other hand, there's a whole bunch of worrying about synchronization issues you just don't have to deal with. I mean, it's all single-threaded, so the worst thing that happens is if you're not careful, you get concurrent modification exceptions where things fired off listeners from lists end up modifying the list and then disaster. But we've not had any real problems with needing extra threads. We've done a bunch of deferred command stuff and timer stuff, but yeah, sometimes you think, wouldn't it be nice if I could just have something running continuously in the background to do this sort of incremental stuff? But if you use timers, you can certainly do like a game programming type of approach of we've got some sort of cycle that goes on. We're going to spend so much time on doing this and so much time on doing something else, and then we're going to do this other thing and just do it all in a big loop if we really needed to. The thing that causes us, or is going to cause us the most trouble, is the layout and line routing issues. Because at the moment with some graphs, we can run into the hard limit that IE has of you can only execute a certain number of statements before you get that pop-up. And it doesn't matter how fast they run. If you hit that statement limit, you will get the pop-up about unresponsive script. And for that reason, we'll probably have to do the let the browser breathe technique of splitting the thing up into separate sections, provided we can get that past the usability. Because one of our first things was, hey, we'll actually position all the objects, and then we'll go ahead and draw the lines on a separate pass. That might not actually get past usability. They might say, no, it's not going to work. We're going to have to make the damn thing faster.
I mean, working within the constraints of browsers and JavaScript is just something you kind of have to put up with. And it's not something we missed, and I second what Alex said. I mean, having timers, running those, we set up a lot of queues of deferred command and stuff, and we wait for, you're doing it's programming to, a response to what the user wants, and, we have a lot of things that wait around in queues or in timers to get executed later, and it doesn't seem, the fact that you can't multi-thread it doesn't seem to be a drawback.
There is one thing on the, sorry, sort of related to that. In the GWT unit test, when you're trying to do stuff where you want to get the response back from the server and then do another request and then get the response back from the server and then do another request, I end up with a bunch of classes which are basically like, 16 different methods where each method calls the next one inside a deferred command to actually manage to give it enough time to communicate with the server and get the response back, or for all the other deferred commands that are done by the first chunk of logic, time to execute before I do my next thing. That's sort of an inconvenience, really, but on the other hand, it works. And
we sometimes have problems with, we have problems sometimes. You got to think a different mindset if you want to turn, all of a sudden you have all these asynchronous calls, and what if you want to turn it into synchronous? You have to really decide how, it's a different problem to solve. Do you nest all the calls within each other that you don't call the next one until it's on success, but that has different complications and consequences? So it's certainly, that's a design, a tough design thing to work out.
Thank you.
The browser is essentially using sort of the event-driven model that a lot of windowing systems use as well. I mean, it's single-threaded but asynchronous. So everything's sort of callback driven in some ways, and so it's a well-studied, programming problem, and just presented within the sort of frustrating plethora of browser quirks.
My name's Jorge. I came from Shasta QA, which is just a QA outsourcing company. But you said that you farmed out some of your QA to Russia. And given how many debugging tools GWT has, how is your QA effort like structured? What do they do?
Okay, so the way we do it is, the developers write unit tests, and we try and test, we can test all the backend stuff using JUnit. We try and test the models and the commands using GWT unit. Of course, we're always in the state where we don't have enough actual automated tests. We would like more of them. The people in the Ukraine do manual testing on all 3 browsers that we support to make sure the thing actually looks correct. They have to do far too much at the moment. There are far too many sorts of trivial tests along the lines of, this menu here, does it actually have all the correct options visible? When I go to this item here, I should see 2 fewer options. This one should be disabled, etc., etc. That really we should be able to automate in some way. And that's our current drive, is to take all of those more simple ones that we can automate and pragmatically try and automate them so that the QA people can actually provide more value, less let's just press buttons and record that the thing is correct, and more think about how someone is going to use the product, what sort of features, things like, I tried to do this and it seemed awkward to me, we'd like to get the QA to that sort of level, and less of the, I executed test 1405 and I saw that this option was correct. Well, that's great. We need to be able to automate that and get them to thinking about, I pressed the PDF button, but it seemed not to work the way I would have expected it. And some of that is, we need to educate them as well so that they start to think in that way. But at the moment, they're just so swamped with trivial stuff that we'd really like to be able to automate.
Hi, my name is David Farrar. I'm the CTO of Zion Software, and we develop instant messaging toolkits and frameworks for Java and other developers. Question I have is regarding the GWT. Do you have any predefined, and this is more of a general question, I think, to the GWT team, and we're just getting our feet wet with it, but are there predefined CSS templates or predefined CSS files that work with the framework, or do I have to handwrite the CSS for anything that I use?
Well, GWT has style names that they apply to widgets by default. And some of those styles, I think, have a couple of things that they recommend, that you could do, but it's, from our experience, was a lot of, they left a lot up to you. I mean, they applied the name to a list box, they applied the name to a tab bar, they applied the name to a panel by default, but it's up to you what you want to do with that.
I think if you saw the last presentation, they alluded to in the end, the one downside of applying default styles to a lot of these frameworks is it's very hard to extract yourself from those styles should you choose to, because there's a lot of assumptions that go into CSS styles to make things look perfect. And I think the GWT framework has erred on the side of letting each application have full control over the UI, which does produce a little more work up front, but probably a little fewer headaches, as you upgrade and whatnot.
And we sort of backed into it because we had the prototype already with a bunch of styles in it. We sort of adopted those styles into the GWT version of the thing and then iterated on that. I mean, if we were approaching it from scratch, it would be a more difficult question for us. Do we go with the GWT ones, or do we add an additional style to every single thing?
And they have set style name, and then set dependent style name has proven to be really helpful as well. They parse through. If your style name is ABC, you set that as the style name, and then you set a dependent name of hover on that element, it'll say ABC-hover, and it'll generate that style for you, and that's really helpful for, like I said, doing things like hover, especially in IE6, which doesn't support that, and stuff like that. So.
Hi, my name is Sachin, and I work with MSCI Bara. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you guys is, do you have any experience with any custom widgets at all? The reason I'm asking is because I faced, and I griped about this to Joel earlier, about the tree control specifically. It was extremely slow. So do you guys have any experience, and what it's been like if you, like using composites or something like that, if you developed your own custom widgets or controls in GWT?
Yeah, we've done some of it. So some of the things on, so when you look at the map page in our application on the left-hand side, you have that outline. I mean, that's a widget that we built. So we've done a fair amount of it. Again, because that was the way that we sort of did it in Dojo. That was the way that we moved over to doing it in GWT. We build widgets for the things that we want. So we've got the actual map itself is a widget, and so are all the little boxes that appear on it. On the diagram view, we changed, like I said, to going to generating the HTML directly and sticking it in one go, because the other one was too slow. It may turn out that we were sort of mistaken, because the thing that turns out to be very slow, I believe, is setting all the little byte flags to say which listeners are actually hooked into the events is apparently enormously slow, where you go through and just make... Damon, is that true?
That is true.
Yeah. I mean, that thing is surprisingly slow, and that contributed a lot to our thinking that the whole diagramming view was very slow.
I mean, I think everything on our page extends one of the basic widgets. Extends horizontal panel, extends flow panel, extends vertical panel. And the beauty of that is you make a class like that, and you can wrap in all the data information into the widget itself, and that the fact that I can have a horizontal panel that stores a bunch of ints or booleans or arrays or whatever I need it to store. It's kind of like a super powerful table or a super powerful widget. So.
All right, I think we have time for one or two more questions, and then we're going to wrap it up. But we're not done yet, folks. There's some other things going on. It's 6:15. You can move from here down to the Ralston room, which I believe is where you had lunch. There's a product showcase, followed by a code hackathon of some sort. So this will be your opportunity to grab just about any of the speakers, folks from Google, and get your hands dirty banging away on some bits. I think we can take one last question. I want to remind you, though, before we get to that last question and everybody disappears, that I believe there is also beer involved in this session. And before you get to the beer, please fill out the blue eval sheet for today, or after the beer if you'd like. But if fill it out as you're packing up. If you just leave it at the end of the table, that would be helpful to us, and we pick those up. I don't have any bodies to pick them up. All right, so this is the last question, and then we'll let Bret wrap it up with some appropriately inspirational final comment.
I shall pass this.
I think that unless there's one, this is the last question. This is a very, very big moment.
Hi, my name is Chris. I'm working on clinical management software. We have an existing, I guess it's mostly for Alex, mostly because your app looks more like a desktop app. And,
yeah.
So anyways, we're migrating an existing rich client desktop app. We want to migrate the functionality to a GWT app. I was just wondering if you had any insight into what kind of challenges you faced trying to present desktop app style functionality, but on a single web page, without the ability to, have lots of windows and that sort of thing. If you really ran anything like that.
No, I mean we have ended up with a thick client running in a browser. Basically, I mean it's from my point of view, an enormous, that one page that does the map and the diagram is an enormous thing. I don't really have any advice for converting an existing app, because sort of the way we started it, the whole thing was targeting, we want something on the web, and it's going to have all these features, and there's a huge list of features, and so it's ended up much more massive than, because we have the technology in GWT, we actually managed to build it. But I wouldn't have started off saying what we'll have is 34,000 lines of Java code that we will try and execute in a browser.
I don't have that many inspirational remarks. I wasn't quite prepared. But if I had any inspirational remarks, I would basically echo everything Kelly Norton said in the last presentation. I think there are a lot of applications that are 34,000 lines of code and a thick client, but the vast majority of AJAX applications are merely a way to provide a better user experience to users. And so it's important to think about your user experience and draw the line between creating something cool and creating something usable and useful. And GWT is a great tool that helps enforce some of those patterns, but like any tool, it can be abused. So that would probably be my overarching comment. And thank you very much for having us all here.
Thank you.